South Africa, for lack of better terms, as a country, is morally, financially, and operationally bankrupt on all fronts. Morally, because the government, the ruling party, has essentially stolen everything from the South African people. These are the facts. We're not talking politics. We're talking facts. The South African government over the last 25 years has stolen money, stolen the future of all South Africans, not one political party. South Africa is financially bankrupt, number two. The reality is the debt at the Treasury, all of the insolvent / bankrupt state-owned enterprises and other parastatal entities is out of control. And when you add that all up to a bubble, you say South Africa as a whole is financially bankrupt. And then finally, the third point I want to make to you is South Africa is operationally bankrupt. Eskom, the power generation and transmission and distribution company, is not only bankrupt financially, but they're operationally bankrupt. They haven't invested, as we've talked about in detail, in the assets for over 20 years. The place is an absolute disaster. The reality is South Africa cannot produce any more power. And that is a direct result of fraud, corruption, embezzlement, and ongoing fraud, corruption, embezzlement, and a corrupt government. The rail system is essentially broken. They can barely get coal to port to take advantage of these ridiculously high prices, even with all the skimming, the fraud, the corruption in the coal market. The ports are broken. It goes on and on. South Africa Airways is a long time ago. The reality, my fellow South Africans, is the South African government doesn't want to solve the problem because the fraud, corruption, embezzlement, and malfeasance and lack of morality in South Africa is so corrupt and pervasive that they can't do anything, because the minute they let somebody like me get involved, they're done. Their problem is they can't buy enough consultants anymore to tell you a story. There's no more stories to tell. The storytelling in South Africa is over. The only story they've got now they're trying to tell is the Green New Deal. We're going to borrow hundreds of billions of US dollars to build green solar and wind and batteries and whatever other bullshit they can throw at you. Let me tell you with absolute certainty, it's 100% fraud. South Africa can't afford the debt, and they're going to steal all the money, meaning the ANC and their criminal syndicates are going to steal all the money from these Green New Deals. Where do you think all the money's going in the last 25 years? Offshore, Mauritius, Cyprus, Switzerland. The South African ruling party and the criminal syndicates have raped the country. They have destroyed your future. They have to let South Africa burn, collapse, because the minute they open the door to me, and I'm the one at the door, they are done, and they know it. They know that we have the dossier, we have the financial crimes evidence from everything, from years and years of research and intelligence. So they're in a box, and that's the answer to the hundreds of thousands of questions we received over the last 3 years. The South African government is in a box. They have nowhere to go. They're broke. They've run everything into the ground. They can't borrow in international markets outside of the Treasury debt, which is starting to cap out. And the wheels are falling off. And so what do? We put out an economic report that says they'll probably start doing the land grabs just because they got nothing else. The ANC ruling elite and the criminal syndicate has sold out the Black Africans, the Indian Africans, the white Africans, and Asian Africans in South Africa to the colonialists in Europe. So while on one side they say the colonialists have oppressed South Africa, the reality is they have sold out to the very colonial rulers that they say that they're fighting. The South African government and the criminal syndicates who pay patronage to them and they patronize have essentially sold you out. Every single South African citizen has been sold out. South Africa is bankrupt. I'm here to tell you the facts. I'm not here to be your friend. I'm not a politician. I'm not here to tell you the ANC's view, the DA's view, the EFF's view, or anybody else's view. I'm here to tell you what you're facing. We've already given the solutions for the power issues, the energy issues. Yes, we get involved in water and other things, and we've been asked to work on the rail, but let's focus on the energy, because without the lights on, South Africa is dead. Because nobody wants to open a business. I'm talking about industrial businesses. We need baseload power. We need 25, 35, 45,000 megawatts of baseload power incrementally built in South Africa. That's not going to happen from wind and solar. So when you think about all this money that they're saying they're bringing in debt, there's nobody giving South Africa foreign direct investment. There's nobody putting equity, real cash in. Loan is a loan. Debt is debt. Whether it's a 4% rate or 5% rate or a 6% rate, I'm going to give it to you straight. South Africa can't afford it because the tax base in South Africa has collapsed. South Africa has roughly 7 to 8% of its population that pays 80% of the taxes. And it's that tax base is shrinking. So when you look at it, South Africa's debt is here. The corrupt ruling government and the criminal cabal wants to raise the debt higher, and the tax revenues are going down, and the commercial income is going down in South Africa because the lights aren't on, because everything's broken. The rail's broken. The ports are broken. The power generation's broken. The transmission distribution's broken. You can't even move freight in the air sometimes. So this is what you call a failed nation, a failed state. Debt's out of control. Operations and all of the infrastructure collapses. The ANC is not communist or socialist. They're criminals. They're crooks. And they are patronizing criminal syndicates who are stealing everything in South Africa. They're stealing from every single South African. They steal everything. Everything is stolen. We have the data. South Africans need to stand up and push back immediately against this corruption. Otherwise, you're going to be living in the dark. You're not going to have any water, running water. You're not going to have any sewage. You're not going to have any food being distributed. And South Africa is going to erupt into an absolute chaotic disaster. And when that happens, I can tell you what your ruling party is going to do in the criminal syndicate. They're going to leave. They're going to get on their planes and leave, because they've already got billions and billions and billions of rand and dollars offshore from the last 25 years. They are all extremely wealthy. They have stolen from every single South African. The ruling elites have stolen everything. And that's why South Africa is on the verge of collapsing. So what do we do next? We've already told the ruling elites, you got to give us the power generation assets. Not me. You have to give them up to the creditors and to the people of South Africa with adult supervision, and they have to be ring-fenced from the fraud, the corruption, the fuel contract embezzlement, the coal contract embezzlement, the operations and maintenance. That's the only thing that's going to save South Africa in the near term. It's not going to save South Africa from all the other issues. But we can keep the lights on, but it's going to have to be completely detached from the ANC, completely detached from Eskom's corrupt regime. They have to give up the generation assets, and they have to give up the transmission and distribution assets to professionals who can come in. Otherwise, what they're going to do is they're just going to continue to linger, and the wheels are going to come off to a nub, and essentially the grid's going to collapse, the power generation fleet will collapse, and they'll continue to rake in billions and billions of US dollars by skimming and stealing off these new renewable contracts, which aren't saving South Africa. They're not doing a thing for South Africa. And it goes beyond energy, but energy is the basic starting point. That's where we have to start. So for all of you that ask, well, what's the next step? We've got to start with saving the energy assets. And let me tell you right now, folks, the energy assets are in desperate, pitiful shape. Now, if the ANC ruling party and the criminal syndicates who they patronize and they work together, the triumvirate, don't give it up, what's the future? The future is bankruptcy in South Africa. The future is chaos. The future is riots, food riots, water riots, fuel riots. South Africa can't even produce fuel for its own economy now. Did you know that? Did you know that South Africa's water system is collapsing? Did you know that South Africa's rail is only operating at 50%, meaning they can't even get their commodities to port, to ship them out to make export money, even though they steal half that money too? That's what you call a failed state. But we're not here to solve the macroeconomic problem. The South African people have to rise up, and they have to push back on this criminal syndicate. The minute the South African people rise up against this criminal syndicate and corruption and take their government back, then we'll start the road to recovery. And it's going to be a very long road. We're talking about 20 years to fix the problem, because it took 25 years to take the country apart by the fraud, corruption of the ruling party and the criminal syndicates. These are the facts. These are the facts. God bless South Africa.